A poor girl sheltered a stranger for one night, not knowing he was a millionaire cowboy. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Tarrant, a small town nestled on the edge of a dusty, forgotten desert. The sun had long set, and the sky was heavy with the promise of a storm. The air smelled of rain, thick and sweet, but it would be hours before the first drop hit the dry earth. In a small, weathered cabin on the outskirts of the town, Emma Harper prepared for another lonely night. Her home was humble, nothing more than a single room with a stove, a table, and a few worn chairs. She had no family left. Her parents had passed away years ago, and since then she'd been on her own, struggling to make ends meet with her meager earnings from odd jobs around town. Life had been hard, but she made do. After all, what else could she do? She placed a pot of stew on the stove, the only comfort she could offer herself after a long day of hard work. The room was dim, the flickering light from a single oil lamp casting shadows on the walls. Her thoughts wandered, but her heart felt empty. She hadn't spoken to anyone in days, except for a few polite exchanges with neighbors. It wasn't that she didn't like people. It was just that they often seemed too busy for someone like her. People like her didn't matter much in a town that had seen better days. As she ladled some stew into a bowl, a sudden knock on the door startled her. Emma's hand froze, the spoon suspended in midair. Who could it be at this hour, especially with a storm coming? She hadn't been expecting anyone. Another knock. Louder this time. "Who's there?" she called out, wiping her hands on her apron as she approached the door. "Please, miss," a deep voice called from the other side. "I'm in need of shelter. The storm's coming in hard and I've got nowhere else to go." Emma hesitated for a moment, unsure. She wasn't one to invite strangers into her home, especially with the way the world was these days. People were different. They could be dangerous. But there was something in the man's voice that made her pause. He sounded exhausted, desperate even. Her heart went out to him. She opened the door just a crack, peering out into the gathering darkness. The man standing there was tall, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light. He looked like he hadn't had a decent meal in days, his clothes soaked through with rain. His eyes were hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but Emma could see the weariness etched in his posture. I don't normally take in strangers," she began, her voice unsure. "I understand," he said, his voice thick with fatigue. "But I promise, I won't be a bother. Just a place to sleep for the night. I'll be gone by morning." Emma studied him for a moment longer. There was something about his calm demeanor that put her at ease. She had nothing to lose. If she turned him away, he'd be out in the storm, alone. She couldn't live with that. "All right," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "Just for the night, though." The man nodded gratefully, and as he entered, she noticed the way he moved. There was a certain strength in his movements, a quiet confidence that made her think he wasn't just any ordinary traveler. But she didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. After all, she had her own troubles to think about. "You're kind," the man said softly, taking off his soaked jacket and hanging it by the fire to dry. "I won't forget this." Emma nodded but said nothing. She wasn't used to being thanked. People usually just took what they needed and moved on. She busied herself with preparing another bowl of stew, not wanting to look him in the eye too much. It felt strange to have someone in her home, even stranger to share a meal with a stranger. She served him the food, and they ate in silence for a few moments. "Where are you from?" Emma asked, trying to make small talk. She couldn't help herself. The silence felt thick, pressing down on her. "Far from here," the man replied. "Just passing through. I've been traveling for a while now, looking for something I lost." His answer was vague, but Emma didn't push. People who didn't want to talk about their past were often better left alone. She took a seat across from him at the small table and began to eat her own meal. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough. She watched the rain through the window, the wind howling louder outside, rattling the shutters. "Looks like we're in for a rough night," the man said, looking out the window. "The storm's only getting worse." Emma nodded. She had lived through enough storms to know that the worst of them often came after dark. It was best to stay indoors when that happened. As the night wore on, the storm outside intensified, the wind whistling through the cracks in the cabin. The fire crackled, and Emma and the man sat quietly, the only sounds the storm and the occasional crack of wood from the fire. After a while, Emma stood up and cleared the table. She was about to excuse herself when the man spoke again. "You are a good soul, miss," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "Not many people would do what you did." "I won't forget it." She smiled faintly, feeling a warmth spread through her at his words. It wasn't much, but it felt nice to be appreciated. "I just did what anyone would do, she said, shrugging. No, the man said, his gaze lifting to meet hers for the first time. Not everyone would, and I'm grateful for it. Emma's heart skipped a beat. There was something in his eyes, something that told her he wasn't just talking about the shelter. She couldn't place it, but she felt a strange connection to him, something she hadn't felt in years. It was as if, for just a moment, they weren't two strangers. She wasn't just the poor girl living in a tiny cabin, and he wasn't just a mysterious traveler seeking refuge. For that brief moment, they were simply two people, sharing a quiet evening together in the midst of a storm. "Good night, miss," the man said, standing up. "I'll sleep on the couch. You don't need to worry about me." "Good night," Emma replied softly, a little uncertain of what to say next. She watched as he laid down on the couch, pulling a blanket over himself, and before long the only sound in the cabin was the storm outside and the gentle crackle of the fire. Emma sat there for a while longer, her thoughts swirling. She didn't know why she felt so at ease with this man, but something told her she'd be hearing more from him soon. This part keeps the narrative engaging. The storm raged through the night, its winds howling like wolves circling their prey. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Emma lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She hadn't expected to have a stranger in her home, especially not one like Jack. There was something about him that didn't quite add up, but she couldn't place it. His quiet strength, his calm demeanor, it was all so unusual. The storm outside grew fiercer, and the rain began to beat harder against the windows. Emma turned over in bed, trying to sleep, but the noise kept her awake. She glanced at the clock beside her bed. It was nearly midnight. The storm was showing no signs of stopping anytime soon. In the corner of the room, the couch where Jack had settled for the night was empty. The blanket he had used was thrown over the back, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed from the other side of the room. Emma sat up quickly, her heart racing. She hadn't heard him get up, and now he was moving around her house in the dark. She slipped out of bed quietly and crept toward the kitchen, peeking around the corner. Jack stood near the window, looking out at the rain with a troubled expression on his face. His back was to her, but he seemed unaware that she was watching. "I didn't mean to wake you," Jack said, suddenly turning around, his voice calm but serious. Emma froze. "You didn't." "I just heard you moving around." Jack gave a small, almost amused smile. "I don't sleep well in storms." Emma nodded, still unsure of what to make of him. He wasn't like anyone she'd met before. "I thought you were resting," she said. "I was," Jack replied, his voice low. "But I guess I'm not as tired as I thought." He stood there for a moment, his eyes thoughtful, his gaze shifting to the fire crackling in the hearth. There was a brief silence before he spoke again, his voice softer this time. "You've been kind to me, miss," he said, his tone filled with sincerity. "Not many people would have offered a stranger shelter." Emma shifted uncomfortably. She hadn't been expecting such praise, especially from someone she barely knew. "It's nothing," she replied, trying to brush it off. "It's just the right thing to do." Jack turned his gaze back to the window. "I wish I could say the same about myself," he murmured. Emma furrowed her brow. "What do you mean?" Jack hesitated before answering, his voice tinged with regret. "I'm not who I seem to be." The words caught Emma off guard. She wasn't sure what he meant, but she knew there was more to his story than he had let on. She had been right to feel like something wasn't quite right, but she wasn't sure what to say, so she stayed quiet, waiting for him to continue. Jack ran a hand through his hair, clearly conflicted. "I never meant to lie," he said, his voice a little strained. "But sometimes in life, you have to protect the things you care about, and that means hiding who you really are." Emma looked at him, unsure of how to respond. "I'm just a poor girl, Jack. I don't have much to protect." Jack's eyes softened at her words, and for a brief moment she saw a flicker of something in them, something like sadness. "You don't have to have money to have something worth protecting," he said quietly. There was a long pause between them. The storm continued to rage outside, but the air inside the cabin felt still, heavy with unsaid words. Emma's curiosity got the best of her, and she finally spoke. "Why are you hiding, Jack?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Jack hesitated for a long moment, his eyes darkening. "Because the world I come from, it's dangerous. And if I let anyone know who I really am, they'll come after me." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. She'd known something about Jack wasn't ordinary, but to hear him say it out loud felt like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just a traveler, a man passing through. He was running from something. What are you running from? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack's face tightened, his jaw clenching as if the question had touched on a raw nerve. I can't explain it all, he said slowly, but let's just say that the life I had before was one of wealth and power. And when you have that much, people want a piece of it. But I've made enemies, powerful ones. And they won't stop until they've taken everything from me. Emma was stunned. She didn't know what to say. She had heard stories about rich families and business tycoons, but she never imagined she'd be caught up in something like this. You're telling me you're rich? Emma asked, trying to wrap her mind around what he was saying. Jack's expression darkened. Not just rich. Wealthy enough to own land, businesses, and a whole ranch. I'm part of a family that's been in control for generations, but now I've lost it all. And the people who are after me, they'll stop at nothing. Emma took a step closer, her mind racing with questions. But why come here, to a place like this? Jack looked at her with a hard expression, as if weighing whether or not to tell her the truth. Because I've heard stories about this place. About people who don't care about wealth or status. People who just want to live simple lives. And for a moment, I thought I could be one of them. But I didn't expect to meet someone like you. Emma's heart fluttered at his words. She didn't know what to make of everything Jack had just told her. His world seemed so different from hers, full of danger, secrets, and power. She was just a girl trying to get by, trying to find meaning in a life that felt too small. Jack looked at her for a long time, his gaze softening. I didn't mean for you to get caught up in all of this, he said, his voice sincere. But I don't know what to do anymore. I'm lost, Emma. She didn't know what to say to that. She had always prided herself on being strong, but this was something she couldn't solve, something bigger than her, bigger than both of them. We'll figure it out, she said finally, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her heart. Jack nodded, looking at her with gratitude in his eyes. Thank you. The rain continued to fall, and the storm raged outside, but inside Emma's cabin, the storm between them had only just begun. The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm. The storm had long since passed, leaving behind a sky that was clearer than ever, the air fresh and cool. But for Emma, the days felt heavier. Jack's revelation had shaken her more than she expected. She hadn't realized it at the time, but the stranger she had helped was hiding something much bigger than himself. Jack hadn't left her cabin since that night. He didn't seem to have any intention of staying longer, but the truth he'd shared with Emma weighed on her mind. She found herself thinking about his words constantly. The dangerous people chasing him, his wealth, the family he came from, none of it fit with the man who had walked into her life that stormy night. Jack seemed like an ordinary traveler, someone who had lost his way, much like her. Yet, now he had admitted he was far from ordinary. His past was filled with riches, power, and enemies, things Emma could hardly imagine. She watched Jack from the window as he worked outside the cabin chopping wood. His movements were strong and measured, yet there was an air of unease about him. He was trying so hard to blend into this simple life, but it wasn't meant for someone like him. She had seen the way he looked at the horizon, always distant, always searching for something. The weight of his past was visible in his eyes, even when he smiled. Emma felt a mixture of sympathy and confusion. How could someone with so much be running from everything? And why had he ended up here, in her tiny cabin, of all places? It wasn't long before Jack came inside, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. He had worked most of the morning and seemed to be trying to distract himself from whatever haunted him. But Emma wasn't fooled. She could see it in the way he moved, in the tension in his shoulders. Can I help you with something? Emma asked as she set down the cloth she'd been folding. She tried to sound casual, but the question was much more than it seemed. Jack hesitated, then nodded slowly. Actually, yes. I'd been thinking about something, about what we talked about the other night. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had been hoping they wouldn't bring it up again. She had tried to put it out of her mind, but it seemed like it was impossible to forget. I know it's a lot to take in, Jack said, his voice soft, almost apologetic. But I've been on the run for a long time, Emma. I thought I could escape it all, but I was wrong. People like me can't just disappear. Emma looked down at her hands, unsure of what to say. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions, none of which she could find the right words for. What do you want from me, Jack? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why are you still here? Why haven't you left? You could go anywhere. Jack shook his head. I don't want to drag you into my mess. You've been kind to me. I don't deserve it. But the truth is, I don't know where to go anymore. I've been running for so long that I don't remember what it feels like to stop, to just live. Emma felt a pang of sympathy for him, even though she couldn't fully understand what he was going through. She knew all too well what it felt like to feel trapped by circumstances beyond your control. She had been stuck in this town for years, never really able to leave, never really able to break free. "Where do you plan to go from here?" Emma asked, the question escaping her before she could stop it. Jack looked out the window, his eyes distant again. "I've been thinking about that. I can't keep running. I need to face it head on, whatever happens. But I'm not sure I can do that alone." His words hung in the air between them, a silent plea for help. Emma felt her heart go out to him. She had always been a fighter, someone who never gave up, but she didn't know how to fight this battle. It was bigger than anything she had ever faced. "You're not alone," Emma said quietly. "Not as long as I'm here." Jack turned to look at her, a flicker of something, relief, maybe, passing through his eyes. "I'm not sure you fully understand what you're offering, Emma," he said, his voice soft but serious. "This is dangerous. There are people who would hurt you if they knew you were involved in this." Emma didn't flinch. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. "I don't care. I'm not going to turn my back on you, Jack."
"You've already done enough for me. Let me help you now."
There was a long pause as Jack looked at her, his expression unreadable. Emma held his gaze, refusing to back down. Finally, Jack sighed, his shoulders relaxing as if a weight had been lifted. "You're a rare one, Emma," he said softly. "Most people wouldn't even think twice about walking away. But you're different." Emma smiled faintly. "I'm not afraid of a little danger. And if it means helping you, then I'll face it." Jack looked at her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "All right. We'll do this together, but we have to be careful. We have to be smart. The people I'm running from are ruthless. They won't stop until they get what they want." Emma's heart raced, but she stood firm. "We'll be careful. We'll figure it out." Over the next few days, Jack and Emma began to make plans. Jack had a place he needed to go, a safe house of sorts, where he could lay low for a while. But Emma wasn't sure if she could trust that everything would be all right. It seemed like Jack's past was going to catch up with him no matter how far they went. Still, she couldn't bring herself to back away now. She had made her decision. Jack was more than just a stranger. He was someone who needed her help, and for reasons she couldn't fully understand, she needed him too. They spent their days preparing, gathering supplies, and laying out a plan. Emma wasn't sure how long they could stay hidden, but for the first time in a long while she felt like they had a chance to escape the shadows of their pasts and step into something new. But they couldn't do it alone. As the days passed, Emma realized something. She had never been so alive. The danger, the uncertainty, it was all part of something much bigger than her simple life in the cabin. And for the first time, Emma wondered if perhaps, just maybe, Jack wasn't the only one running from something. Perhaps she was too. The days that followed were filled with quiet tension. Jack had stayed with Emma in her small cabin, and together they made plans. Though the immediate danger had not yet caught up to them, Emma could feel the weight of Jack's past lurking just beyond the horizon. But for now, they worked in silence, chopping wood, mending fences, and preparing for whatever lay ahead. Jack had finally started to share more with Emma about the life he had left behind. His ranch was a sprawling piece of land surrounded by rugged mountains and fields filled with cattle. He described it as a paradise, a place where he had once felt free, but now it was no longer his. The people who had taken everything from him were always just a step behind. He couldn't stay in one place for too long. Still, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this quiet life, this life she had made for herself, was about to change in a way she couldn't yet understand. She had always been content with simplicity, but now, with Jack's presence, there was a new sense of excitement in the air. She couldn't help but feel that she was on the edge of something big. One morning, after a long stretch of planning and organizing, Jack turned to Emma as they sat on the porch of the cabin, the warm sun shining down on them. "We have to leave," Jack said, his voice serious. Emma looked at him, confused. "Leave? Where will we go?" Jack paused, looking out at the open plains. His face was grim, but there was something else, something hopeful, hidden in his eyes. "We can't stay here anymore. The people who are after me won't stop until they find me. I've been running for too long. But if we can get to the city, I might be able to find a way to fix this, to stop running." Emma's heart raced. She hadn't expected him to say this so soon. The thought of leaving the cabin, the only place she had ever known, filled her with unease. But she also knew that Jack was right. If they stayed, they would be sitting ducks. "You're sure?" Emma asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Jack nodded slowly. "I don't want to drag you into this, but I can't do this alone. I can't keep running, and I can't face them without help." Emma took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. This was it, the moment when everything changed. She could walk away, return to her quiet life, and forget about the dangerous man who had crossed her path. Or she could stand by him and face whatever came next. She stood up from the porch and walked over to him, standing by his side as they looked out over the horizon. "I'm with you," she said, her voice steady. "Wherever you go, I'll go. We'll face it together." Jack turned to look at her, his eyes softening. "You don't know what you're getting into." Emma smiled. "I don't care. I trust you." For a moment they stood there in silence, the wind whispering through the trees. Jack looked at her, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper in his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I don't deserve your trust, but I'll do everything I can to protect you." Together they gathered what little they needed, a few supplies, a couple of changes of clothes, and the hope that they could leave behind the life they had known. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get them started. As they packed their things, Emma couldn't help but wonder what the future held. They would have to move quickly, keep their heads down, and hope that Jack's enemies wouldn't catch up with them before they reached the city. But Emma wasn't afraid. She had faced hardship before, and she knew how to survive. This was no different. They left the cabin at dawn, the first rays of light breaking over the hills. Emma glanced back at the small home that had once been her whole world. It felt strange to leave it behind, but she knew that this was the right choice. She was ready for something new, something bigger than the small life she had lived before. As they walked down the dirt road, Emma couldn't help but notice the change in the air. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. She and Jack didn't speak much as they traveled, each lost in their own thoughts. The road ahead was uncertain, but they were together. That was all that mattered. After several days of travel, they reached the city. It was a place full of noise, people, and opportunity. But it was also full of danger. Jack had once been a part of this world, and now he was a stranger in it. He knew the city well, its shadows, its dark corners, and the people who ran it. He led Emma through narrow streets and crowded marketplaces, always keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. "We need to find someone I can trust," Jack said quietly as they walked through the city's bustling streets. "Someone who can help us. But we can't trust anyone easily here. This is where the people who want me gone will come looking." Emma nodded, her senses alert. She wasn't used to places like this, but she had learned to trust Jack's judgment. He was cautious, always scanning the area, always aware of the danger lurking just out of sight. As they turned a corner, Jack stopped suddenly. He looked at Emma, his expression hardening. "Stay close," he warned, his voice low. "This is where it gets tricky." Emma stayed by his side, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what to expect next, but she knew that the moment they stepped into the heart of the city, their lives would change forever. They walked through the narrow alley, the air thick with tension. Jack's steps were purposeful, his eyes scanning every corner. Emma's nerves were on edge, but she held her ground. They couldn't turn back now. They had come too far. Finally, Jack stopped in front of an old building, its door creaking on its hinges. He turned to Emma and gave her a small, reassuring smile. "This is it," he said. "If there's anyone who can help us, it's him." Emma nodded, her breath catching in her throat. She had no idea what lay beyond that door, but she was ready. With Jack by her side, she knew they could face whatever came next. They walked inside together, ready to confront the future, whatever it might hold.